It's the first Wednesday of the month and it's Webber's Wednesday. It's time to look at North Devon's housing market with Malcolm Prescott, Managing Director of Webber's Estate Agents. Morning, Malcolm.
Good morning. How are you today?
I'm good, thank you. I mean, I know we speak sort of every month and it's really interesting to see how North Devon particularly and the housing market in this area changes in that time. So what sort of stuff are you dealing with at the moment? What's happening now?
Well, I think, and I did touch on this, I think, in our last conversation, I believe that we really are now back to what I see as a seasonal market. There's real evidence that we're seeing that people are busily preparing, wanting and needing to make a move this year, but perhaps instead of the busy market where it was literally every month was the same, I think that we're back to a market where we're almost preparing for the early spring marketplace. And, certainly we've had lots of valuations. Quite a few of our offices have reported more valuations in this January than last January, which is interesting. And we've certainly seen a good number of fresh buyers registering on the list. And I think that they are just waiting for that early spring market. We've had some pretty awful weather, and that does keep people away. It really does. People do look now, I think, to, the daffodils coming up and that traditional spring market. The market is resilient. It really is in the UK, but it is built on confidence. And although that confidence may well have been dented late last year due to the poor decisions taken at, I was saying number 10, but probably number 11, we do see that positive sentiment returning. And I think that certainly most of the agents I speak to, not only in this within Webber's, but outside of the Webber's group and into different parts of the country, it is better than an awful lot of people thought it would be coming into this year. And I think that confidence is building because people are seeing that interest rates are a little bit more stable now, and people are starting to get used to what we would call the new normal, which actually was normal pre-pandemic, if that makes sense.
Yeah, we almost need to all be having this conversation, don't we? Because if we're only hearing the bad stuff in the newspapers or on the TV or anything about inflation and we're all sort of thinking, oh, hang on, let's just sit tight, let's just hold on for a moment. And it can make us really anxious because we can't see, a year, 5 years down the line.
Yeah, I think that's a fair comment. But do I think people are anxious? I don't think they're anxious. I just think that buyers and sellers are maybe just taking a little bit more time because they can. And I think that buyers and sellers alike are taking a little bit longer to do their research, to seek out good, trusted services to support their decisions. Because there has been that negativity, I think that people do want to make sure that the decisions they take are sensible and wise. And I think that people should be doing that. This is a great time and probably the best time to be seeking out people that you can trust and rely on, whether that's your estate agent or your lending source, to make sure that you are doing the right thing. You want someone to support that decision, if you like. But I think we're sort of over what happened late last year, and we are rebuilding to a normal marketplace. And I've used that word so much in the last 2 or 3 months. But all the evidence shows, and if you talk to people, I think if they feel secure in their job and they can afford to buy, history shows they will buy. If it feels good and people can afford it, people will buy. People like owning their own properties in the UK. An Englishman's home is his castle, as they say, and that's the reality. We have a resilient market, and I fully expect, the market early spring to be a good, strong, solid market.
You know that I'm obsessed with Rightmove, and I'm constantly looking at all these nice houses, and I sort of, I don't have a price range on it. I'll just go for all of them. I'm starting off with the 3-4 million ones, and I'm looking at those. And I noticed sort of over the last couple of years, houses of any price would only be on for a day or two. At the moment, things aren't moving very quickly, are they? And I suppose that goes with what you've just said. Things aren't moving as fast as they were. But during the pandemic, I mean, houses would be gone before they even made it to Rightmove.
That's a fair comment. By the way, the one thing I would say is you ought to try looking at on the market as well.
Okay.
They've got a very, very, very good, slick website that's worth looking at. But no, you're right. Properties aren't selling quite as quickly as they were. And I think you've got to always try to say, well, what's the positive in that? Well, I would say that the positive in that is that the market for buyers and sellers is probably less stressful than it was over the last 18 months. Because people were having to take such quick decisions, I think very often people were, almost do I, don't I? Oh, I've got to because I'm in a forced position. So I think this market allows people to be a little bit more considered. And I think it will therefore be a little bit less stressful. The problem is, of course, if you put your house on the market and you're desperate to move, you just want it to happen. And I do understand that as well. And maybe we'll come on to what we can do in a moment in terms of reassuring sellers if that isn't happening. But in terms of buying property, it is a sound investment to buy property. Over the last 10 years, property prices have risen by, I think it's about 53%. It's a little bit over 50%. So the average price has risen from £223,000 to £341,000. And the Southwest is still among the top 3 or 4 areas of growth in the whole of the UK. So do I think and do I believe that it is still a good, strong investment to buy property? Yes, I do. But I think maybe what people need to think about is we're buying a home, we're here for the medium to long term, rather than we'll buy it this year and sell it for next year at more money. And I think that it's having that idea again that you're buying a home, but over the fullness of time, it is a great investment. There is no doubt about that. All of the history shows that.
Are you still seeing a lot of interest from people that don't live in North Devon that would quite like to move to North Devon? Because I know sort of during lockdown and when people's sort of lives changed to working from home more, we were seeing a lot of people, being able to keep their job in wherever and live in North Devon. Are you still seeing a lot of that?
I would say it's reduced a little.
Yeah.
The local market is very strong, but we will always have a market from out of area, particularly the South East Home Counties, West Midlands. Those are 2 areas that we have always sold to, and we will always continue to. Recent stats show that something like 28% of people believe that at some point they will want to use their home to work from. That's an increased statistic that we've seen as a result of the pandemic. And I think that because people can work from home, they can probably choose more so where they live because they don't need to be in a certain area from which to work. So I would say it's a little bit down on what it was in the height of the pandemic, but we still have a strong number of buyers from out of the area. We always will do because the Southwest is one of the best places to live, if not the best place to live in the UK.
Absolutely. I love that I just threw that question at you and you had a statistic up your sleeve ready. Very good at what you do, Malcolm.
Well, I try.
So when you talk about a moment ago about this reassurance, then if, my house is on the market at the moment, I'll be honest with you, I'm trying to move and my house hasn't been whipped up immediately by some prospective buyer. I don't know why not. It's a gorgeous house. But there's going to be so many people like me in that situation with, right, I'm ready to go. I've made that decision in my mind, which is probably the biggest hurdle to get over, isn't it? We are ready to sell. When you're in that frame of mind and you just want to move on, but you can't because that buyer hasn't turned up yet, there's got to be so many people in that sort of position. What would you say to people?
Well, the first thing I would say is there is a buyer for every house. I genuinely believe that there is a buyer for every single property out there. And I think that probably the big change in the market, and I've always said that this is a Weber's market because it's a market where an agent has to work harder to make sure that we bring that buyer forward. We're not in a market that we were in 18 months ago where the reality was people were turning up on the doorstep to say, I've seen it, I'd like to view it, I'd like to buy it, because we had that urgency in the market. So we're now into that market where it is slower paced and your agent needs to be working harder to bring in the right person for the property. Our viewing to sale ratio has altered. In the height of the market when it was busy, 8 viewings to a sale. It's now probably more like 12 viewings to a sale. So you have to work harder to make sure that you bring the buyer in. your agent needs to identify who is the target market for your property. Because if you don't know who's going to buy it, how do you know where to find them? So that's the first thing. If there's people out there that haven't found a buyer, you need to ask that question. It's crucial to understand who is going to buy the property. Is the price right? Is it competitive in amongst the sector that you're in? It's critical to get the price right. Have you got the right photographs? Are you selling the best features of the property? All of those things need to be addressed in a market that is more competitive. And it does come down to having a really good relationship with your agent where you can pick up the phone and say, look, what's happening? By the way, your agent should get to you first. It shouldn't be for you to phone them. Your agent should be on to you to say, this is what we've done and this is what we're doing next. Particularly someone like yourself who clearly you want to move. You want to get on with it. So it's really, really important to have that relationship with an agent. So I wouldn't be downheartened by it because there is a buyer out there, and they will come in for your property. It's just that it is going to probably take a little bit longer than it did 12 or 18 months ago.
I think I probably asked you this question before, but can you tell us your first home that you bought and what you paid for it?
My first home?
Yes.
My first home was a 2-bedroomed terraced house in a little village called Porlock.
Yes.
And I bought it. It was in conjunction with a housing association because I couldn't afford to buy in quotes in the open market. So I bought into a property that I part owned, and that was, you won't believe the figure. It was on the market at $49,950. Am I showing my age?
No, not at all. Not at all.
But the point is, was it ideal for me? Not really. But what it did do was get me into the market. And then when that property sold at a later date, my memory serves me correctly, I believe I sold it for 62, I believe.
Not bad.
Some years later. But, sometimes you have to cut your cloth. And at that time, that got me into the market and that allowed me to then buy another property later on. And so it goes on. And I think I've said this before, sometimes it isn't the ideal property for you, but sometimes you need to just cut your cloth accordingly. So yeah, that was a long time ago.
Wow. And of course
I
now
would say to you, I think just to go back, I think the first 4 weeks of selling a property, even in this market, is really, really crucial to understand what happens in that first 4 weeks. Because that's when it's new, that's when the property's fresh, it's when it hasn't been seen before, and you really should expect in those first 4 weeks a flurry of interest to understand what the market is saying about your property. And if you've got all of those things we've mentioned in order and still the interest is low, then I would expect your agent to pick up the phone and say, put the kettle on, I'm going to come round and sit down and talk to you about what's happening here because we've done A, B, C, D, we've got all of these things in order. We're still not quite getting there, so we need to just understand what we can do differently. And maybe that would need some special social media promotion with a video and maybe an interview with the client who's selling the property to find out, why did you buy it? Why did you buy the property? What was special about it? To almost find a different angle, and sometimes that will be enough to relaunch it, if you like. But the reassurance, by the way, should come from your agent. That's where the reassurance should come from. That's what we're paid to do. We're paid to try and make the process easier and less stressful. So if a client isn't feeling reassured, then honestly I would say that probably the agent isn't really doing their job.
We're loving North Devon. This is The Voice.